The air in the arena shifted long before the lights went out. A subtle change in pressure that the broadcast cameras failed to capture, but the 20,000 souls in attendance felt in their chests. It wasn't the manufactured anticipation of a scheduled main event, where the pyrotechnics are primed and the graphics are cued in the production truck. It was the uneasy, prickly sensation of something going off the rails. The commentary team, usually a well-oiled machine of catchphrases and predetermined banter, fell into a disjointed rhythm, their voices betraying a genuine confusion that bled through the monitors. They stopped talking over each other and started listening to the noise in the building, a low-frequency rumble of uncertainty that sounded less like excitement and more like concern. In the production truck, the screens didn't flicker with a prepared video package. They stayed static, holding on a wide shot of the restless crowd for too long, exposing the cracks in the polished presentation of the show. There was no countdown. There was no screech of feedback or sudden explosion of sound to signal the beginning of the segment. The arena simply began to dim, not with the sharp programmed snap of a lighting cue, but slowly, as if the power was being drained from the building by a heavy, invisible hand. The silence that followed wasn't the respectful hush of a theater. It was the confused silence of a crowd waiting for instructions that never came. Fans glanced at the massive Titantron, expecting a logo, a face, or a brand, but the screen remained a void of pitch black. This was the first sign that control had been lost. In the modern era of sports entertainment, where every second is monetized and micromanaged, silence is the enemy. Yet here it was, stretching out for 10, 20, 30 seconds, suffocating the energy of the room. Security guards at ringside shifted their weight, hands hovering near their earpieces, looking for a directive from the back that seemed to be delayed or non-existent. You could see the panic in their body language, the way their eyes darted from the entrance ramp to the crowd barriers. Realizing that the standard protocols for a fan invasion or a technical glitch didn't apply here, the atmosphere curdled from curiosity into anxiety. It felt like watching a live news broadcast where the anchor stops speaking and stares blankly at the camera breach of the unspoken contract between the performer and the observer. The uneasiness rippled outward, silencing the drunkest rows in the nosebleeds and making the children in the front row cling a little tighter to the barricades. This wasn't part of the show, or if it was designed to feel so dangerously like a mistake that it made everyone uncomfortable. Then the sound began. It wasn't music. It wasn't a licensed track or a generic rock loop produced in a studio. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat amplified through a distorted speaker, slow and deliberate. It didn't hype the crowd up. It weighed them down. The sound was guttural, vibrating the floorboards, syncing with the anxious pulses of the audience. It was an auditory invasive species, foreign to the glitz and glamour of the usual broadcast, signaling that whatever was coming through that curtain wasn't coming to sell merchandise or pop the ratings. It was coming to settle a debt. The commentary headsets remained muted, the announcers seemingly ordered to stay silent, or perhaps struck dumb by the realization of who or what was about to walk through the smoke. The uneasiness peaked, transforming the arena from a place of entertainment into a cauldron of raw, unfiltered tension. When the figure finally emerged, there was no spotlight to catch the glint of sequined gear or the shine of baby oil. The lighting remained dim, casting long, grotesque shadows against the entrance ramp that made the man look larger than he was. Yet somehow diminished, carried by the weight of a history the company had tried to erase. He didn't burst through the curtain with adrenaline or fire. He simply walked out, stepping onto the steel stage with the exhaustion of a soldier returning to a war he thought he had finished. He wore no branding, no logos, just street clothes that looked like they had been lived in for Deza, stark contrast to the high-definition polish of the superstars who had performed earlier that night. His hood was up, obscuring his eyes, but the gait was unmistakable, a broken, rhythmic stride that told a story of surgeries, miles, and betrayals. The crowd reaction was the most jarring element of the entrance. There was no singular pop, that explosive cheer that defines a return. Instead, the noise was a chaotic mix of gasps, low decibel recognition, and a strange, paralyzed quiet from those who couldn't believe what they were seeing. It sounded like a crime scene rather than a sporting event. People didn't jump out of their seats. They stood up slowly, hands covering their mouths, eyes widening as they processed the impossibility of the moment. The cameraman, usually aggressive in getting the perfect hero shot, hung back, zooming in from a distance as if they were afraid to get too close, as if the man walking down the ramp was radioactive. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't acknowledge the fans. He stared straight ahead at the ring, his focus absolute and terrifyingly cold. As he descended the ramp, the commentary feed finally crackled to life, but the voices were stripped of their usual persona. The lead announcer, a man known for his hyperbolic shouting, spoke in a hushed, trembling monotone. He didn't scream the wrestler's name. He simply asked, "Is that?" followed by a long, heavy pause that said more than any scripted line ever could. His color commentator partner, usually quick with a witty remark or a heel justification, remained completely silent, the sound of papers shuffling the only audio coming from their desk. It felt like they were witnessing a ghost walking through a graveyard, a resurrection that wasn't authorized by the powers that be. The lack of corporate branding on the screen, no nameplate, no lower third graphic reinforced the idea that the production truck was paralyzed, unable to package this moment because it existed outside of their database. He reached the barricade, where the separation between the violence of the ring and the safety of the spectator usually dissolves. He stopped. For the first time he looked into the crowd, scanning the faces not for adulation, but for recognition. The look in his eyes was haunting, empty yet burning with a specific, directed anger. He didn't high-five the children or taunt the detractors. He just breathed, his chest rising and falling in the dim light, absorbing the confusion of 20,000 people. The heavy, distorted heartbeat sound faded away, leaving the arena in a vacuum of acoustic space where the only sounds were the shuffling of feet and the isolated shouts of individual fans crying out his name in disbelief. He climbed the steel steps, not with the athletic leap of a superstar, but with the methodical heaviness of an executioner ascending the scaffold. He entered the ring between the ropes, bypassing the turnbuckle pose that usually signals a superstar's arrival. He stood in the center of the canvas, the light slowly raising just enough to reveal the scars on his face and the gray in his beard, marking the passage of time since he last stood in this square. The microphone was already in his hand, though nobody saw him pick it up. He held it loosely, like a weapon he didn't want to use, but knew he had to. The silence in the arena had evolved from confusion to a tense, vibrating anticipation. The audience was desperate for him to speak, to break the tension, to give them a catchphrase that would allow them to cheer and return to the comfort of the show. But he didn't give them that release. He stood there, letting the uncomfortable reality of his presence sink in, forcing them to look at the human being beneath the character they thought they owned. When he finally brought the microphone to his lips, the feedback whined, a sharp, ugly noise that made the front row wince. "They told you I was dead," he whispered, his voice raspy, cracking with an emotion that felt too raw for television.
The audio wasn't mixed properly.
It was dry and harsh, booming off the arena walls with a slapback delay that made him sound lonely. "They told you the machine moves on. They told you the brand is bigger than the blood." He paced the ring, not playing to the hard cam, but walking in a tight, predatory circle. But the blood remembers. The crowd didn't know how to react. A few scattershot chants tried to start nostalgic calls for his old persona, but they died out quickly, suffocated by the seriousness of his tone. This wasn't a promo. This was a confession. He looked up at the luxury boxes, his eyes locking onto the invisible executives behind the glass. The camera angle shifted to a low, upward shot, making him look like a giant judging the gods of the industry. "I didn't come back to save this place," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a growl. "I came back to expose it." The commentary team remained silent, likely having their headsets screamed into by a furious producer, but they dared not interrupt. The tension in the ring was palpable, a physical weight. You could see the veins in his neck, the sweat beading on his forehead not from exertion, but from the sheer stress of the moment. He wasn't acting, he was purging. The lines between the script and the man had vanished, leaving only a dangerous vulnerability that made everyone watching feel like voyeurs. Then came the moment that truly unsettled the room. He stopped pacing and looked directly into the lens of the main camera, breaking the fourth wall with a gaze so intense it felt like he was looking through the screen and into the living rooms of the viewers. He didn't blink. He didn't smile, just stared, holding the silence for an agonizing 10 seconds. It was a stare that communicated years of resentment, loss, and a cold, hard determination. It was an invitation to look away, but nobody could. He dropped the microphone. It hit the canvas with a dull thud that echoed like a gunshot. He didn't wait for music to play him out, simply turned and exited through the crowd, disappearing into the sea of people, leaving the ring empty and the audience stunned, staring at a blank canvas where a wrestling show used to be. The moment the broadcast cut to black seconds too late, leaving a lingering shot of the empty ring, the atmosphere backstage dissolved into absolute pandemonium. The frantic energy that is usually contained within the headsets of the production crew spilled out into the hallways. Producers were sprinting, clutching clipboards that were now useless, shouting conflicting orders into radios that were jammed with static and panic. The gorilla position, the nerve center of the show, just behind the curtain, was a scene of triage. Executives in suits, faces flushed with a mixture of rage and fear, were barking at security teams, demanding to know how the perimeter had been breached, how the timeline had been hijacked, and, most importantly, where he had gone. The carefully constructed rundown of the show, timed to the second, lay ignored on the monitors, the remaining segments of the night rendered irrelevant by what had just occurred. In the locker room, the reaction was a sharp divide between the new generation and the veterans. The younger talent, those who had only known the polished corporate era of the industry, sat in stunned silence. Scrolling through social media on their phones, watching the clip go viral in real time, their eyes wide with the realization that the safety net of the script had just been set on fire. They looked at each other with uncertainty, wondering if their own matches would still happen, or if the show was effectively over. The veterans, however, the ones who remembered the days when chaos was currency, stood in corners, arms crossed, watching the monitors with grim expressions. They knew that the landscape had just shifted under their feet. There was no excitement in their eyes, only the wary recognition that the standard for intensity had just been raised to a level that might break them. The media scrum area, usually a place for rehearsed sound bites and smiling brand ambassadors, was in total disarray. Dirt sheet writers and legitimate journalists alike were typing furiously, ignoring the PR representatives who were trying to herd them into a controlled briefing. Rumors flew faster than facts. Was it a work? Was it a legitimate invasion? Was he arrested? The air was thick with the smell of ozone and nervous sweat. A camera crew, attempting to get a shot of the hallway where the wrestler had exited, was physically blocked by a wall of security, leading to a shouting match that was captured on shaky cell phone footage and uploaded instantly. The backstage area, usually a sanitized bubble of professionalism, felt like a bunker under siege. He, the architect of the chaos, was nowhere to be found in the common areas. He hadn't returned to the dressing room. He hadn't stopped at catering. He had moved through the backstage labyrinth like a phantom, bypassing the yelling agents and the stunned peers, heading straight for the exit door that led to the cold night air. He walked past the family waiting area, where wives and children of other wrestlers stood in confused huddles. He didn't make eye contact. His work was done, but the vibration of his presence remained, shaking the walls of the arena. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, severing the connection between the madness inside and the silence of the parking lot, leaving the billion-dollar machine inside to choke on the reality he had forced down its throat. In the days and weeks that followed, the industry tried to sanitize the moment. They tried to package the footage into hype videos, adding dramatic music and slow-motion filters, attempting to turn the raw, uncomfortable intrusion into a consumable product. They sold T-shirts with the date of the return. They booked matches that promised a resolution. But no amount of post-production polish could scrub away the feeling of that night. The entrance had left a scar on the psyche of the audience, a permanent reminder of the fragility of the spectacle. It wasn't remembered for the moves that followed or the storylines that were spun from it. It was remembered for the feeling of genuine, unadulterated shock, a rare commodity in a world of spoilers and leaks. The legacy of that entrance wasn't measured in championship reigns or merchandise sales, but in the shift it caused in the culture of the sport. It forced a conversation about the human cost of the characters we consume. Fans began to look at the other performers differently, searching their eyes for the same cracks, the same exhaustion that he had worn so openly. The gloss of the high-definition era felt a little thinner, a little less convincing. The suspension of disbelief had been shattered, not by a special effect, but by a dose of reality so potent it poisoned a fantasy. The wrestler himself became a myth, a figure who walked the line between savior and destroyer, never fully trusted by the company again, but never fully rejected by the fans who craved the danger he represented. But the question that lingered, the one that kept viewers awake at night and spawned endless video essays and forum debates, was never fully answered. When he looked into that camera, when he let that silence stretch until it became painful, was he performing? Was it the greatest piece of acting the business had ever seen? A masterpiece of manipulation designed to blur the lines? Or was it a cry for help from a man who had given everything to a business that took everything in return? The debate raged on, but deep down everyone knew the answer didn't matter. The doubt was the point. The uncertainty was the hook. That entrance proved that, in 2026, in an age of total control, the most powerful thing a person could do was simply stop playing the game. It reminded us that the monsters under the bed are real, and sometimes they get tired of hiding. It wasn't a viral moment. It was a mirror held up to the industry, and for the first time in a long time, the industry flinched. The screen fades to black, but the feeling of that heavy, silent walk down the ramp remains, a ghost story told in real time, haunting the arena long after the lights went out.